And I became a redistricting nerd through just nerdy interest. And also I did some training, and I will reference that organization along the way at some point here. But mostly what I want you to know is that you don't need a lot of training to get into redistricting. Redistricting is, it's not that complicated. People make it super complicated, like lots of things in politics. People want it to be super complicated so that regular folks disengage. But the truth is, it is not that complicated. And you can draw maps. And if you're interested in going to that level, I'm happy to help with that. I'm not going to teach you how to draw maps today. We're just going to talk about what the current situation is. So I have to monitor my participant list as well as folks asked to come in. So I wanted to just name a couple organizations that have been partners to me throughout the last couple years of conversations about redistricting. Hometown Organizing Project has done great work on this topic, Alabama Election Protection Network as well, and Alabama Forward. And Alabama Forward, the CEO of Alabama Forward is Evan Milligan, who you might recognize, and you might recognize that name from the Milligan SCOTUS case. So the Supreme Court case, he was the chief plaintiff, the named plaintiff in that case. Get my slides moving along here. Oh, here we go. That's the button I have to pick. All right, other key players that I want to acknowledge and thank. Again, I'm an independent nerd on this. These organizations do this professionally. Legal Defense Fund with the Alabama NAACP. Greater Birmingham Ministries was one of the named plaintiffs in this case, the ACLU of Alabama. And then there are all these plaintiffs. And so you'll see here, there are the Milligan plaintiffs who are from the case that kind of became the named case we all heard about in the news. But there were two other lawsuits that happened at the same time. And when the district court received those lawsuits, they combined them into a single lawsuit. So there was also the Castor lawsuit, led by Marcus Castor as the named plaintiff, and the Singleton lawsuits with Bobby Singleton. So all of these folks have fought for the victory that we have here in Alabama, and they all deserve to be recognized. And many more, I'm sure, as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk some about kind of what is redistricting broadly. I'm going to talk about the laws and the rules that govern redistricting. I'm going to talk about how it happens, who controls it, who are the power brokers that make this all work. And then I'll dig into the Supreme Court case itself and what we can expect to happen next here in Alabama. So lots to cover. If you have a question, issue, whatever, feel free to speak up, and or you can type a question into the chat and I will try to get to it that way. Okay, so redistricting itself is the process used by governments to redraw political district boundaries. This is in the Constitution. It is called out in the Constitution as something that needs to happen. It says there will be a census every 10 years, and that census will be used to draw districts in all of our states. So it's as core as any other constitutional right that we have. In Alabama, as in most places, redistricting is controlled by the incumbents. And what I mean by that is that generally speaking, the people drawing the maps are the people who will get elected via those maps. If that sounds unfair to you, it's because it is unfair to you. Voters should be the ones, I think, that are determining how a map works. And instead, it's the people who are in those offices. And they understandably are going to be motivated by the desire to not lose their job. So the state House and state Senate maps, the outlines of those districts are drawn by the state legislative bodies themselves. So senators are deciding what the Senate districts are going to look like. and House members are deciding what the House districts. They do it together, but it's kind of a corrupt system from start to finish that we let incumbents decide how these maps are drawn, in my opinion. Similarly, city council lines are drawn by city council members. Of course, they don't want to change their districts to look different because they know they got elected with it drawn the way it is. So they want to keep it as much like it the way it is right now as they can. County commission lines, same way. One exception though, the congressional maps are drawn by the state legislature, not by the members of Congress. So you would expect there might be a little bit more fairness in congressional maps, but there isn't really a lot more fairness in congressional maps. Okay, so which lines are we talking about? As I mentioned, it's US House, so that's congressional seats, state House, state Senate, could be things like water districts, state board of education, county commissioners, city council. And I say which lines might be redrawn because they don't have to be redrawn every 10 years. They don't actually have to be drawn every 10 years. The census must be done every 10 years. And then depending on the results of the census, the district lines may or may not have to be redrawn. So that's an important thing to know. So if in your city or your county, if they have not redrawn the district lines, it may be because the census doesn't require, the results of the census do not require it. And what I mean by that is the rules say that it has to be, that the districts all have to be the same size. And let's talk about that. Wait, before we talk about that, let me just say that this really matters. One, because having, you know, those lines kind of define you as a community. Not always, not all of us can say, oh my gosh, you're in House District 74. We're totally neighbors. But for many things like congressional districts, those things kind of do become a part of our identity and our community delineation. So it does matter. I think what we more often think about is the fact that a community, if it is together within a district, a community can choose their representative. If a community is split between districts, it becomes much harder because they're in smaller groups for that community to choose their representative. And even when a community is not big enough to be a majority, they can, if they're a significant part of the district, a community can demand things, right? If you represent a significant portion of the community, you can say, this is what we want to see you do, representative, and they're going to have a hard time ignoring 30% of the community, 30% of their voters. A community, on the other hand, that's split is a community that's often ignored if it's split into too small of pieces. So it really matters. It really matters. Okay. Are you ready? We are going to learn the rules of redistricting. You're going to memorize these by the end of this hour. I'm sorry, but you have to. Okay, so rule number one person, one vote. That does not mean when you go to the voting polls, we're not saying, you know, that the issue is how many ballots you get. That's not what we're talking about. When we say one person, one vote, what we're saying is that each person's vote has to count the same amount. And if in my neighborhood or my district, there are 10,000 voters, and in your district, there are 5,000 voters, your vote is more valuable than mine. In a district with 5,000 people, each voter has 1/5,000th of control. In a district with 10,000 people, you have 1/10,000th of control. So the voters in the district with fewer people are more powerful voters than the voters in the district with more people. So for that reason, we require that all of the districts have the same number of people in them. And what we mean by people has always been up for debate. The 3/5 rule was all about this question of who counts as a person and how much people count as a person. Deborah, you're giving me crazy. You're giving me the face like you think I'm crazy. I see it. The 3/5 compromise was all about how much someone valued. When you decide when you count how many people in the census, how many people live in Alabama, do Black people count as a full person or as 3/5 of a person? That was all about political power and control. Because if you counted them as less people, then, well, and at the time, Black folks couldn't vote. So you wanted to say, we have a district with 10,000 people in it, but only 5,000 of us can vote. And so if you live in a district like that, where only 5,000 of the 10,000 people can vote, you have more power than a voter who lives in a district where all 10,000 of the population members actually vote.
That brings up, I feel like you're getting ready to tell us something. And it's going to be a surprise to us. And I may not like what you're about to say, but I'm bracing myself.
Fair. So our laws say that the same number of people need to live in each district, whether or not all of those people can vote. So who can't vote? Well, young people can't vote. People who have felonies that disqualify them can't vote. And very often, college kids can vote, but not where they live. So the census counts where you sleep at night. And if you're a college kid, you sleep on campus, but you vote back home. So in the district that includes a very large campus, you might have 10,000 people who sleep there, but you only have 5,000 people who vote there. That district is more powerful. Each voter in it is more powerful, but on the other hand, there are 10,000 people living in there. So we shouldn't cut them down. So there's a balance here between wanting the districts to be equal in terms of population, which makes sense in terms of let's send a certain amount of money to each district, that sort of distribution of resources per district. It makes sense it should be based on the number of people who live there. But on the other hand, we also have to keep an eye on how many of those people can actually vote. People in prisons sleep in one county, vote somewhere else, if they vote at all. So, we'll talk a little bit more about campus gerrymandering, prison gerrymandering. These are all ways that the game can be sort of tinkered with. But the general principle is the same number of people in every district. And when we're talking about congressional districts, which we are today, congressional districts are supposed to be very, very exacting about having the same number of people in each district. So we're not saying plus or minus 5%. We're saying like exactly the same number of people in every district. And so that means some of the lines are going to cut through communities, because in order to get an exact match, an exact division of the state into 7 pieces, you're going to have to take some cuts in places that seem a little odd to take them. So we'll look at some examples. I'll keep cranking. Okay, rule number 2. Wait, does everybody remember rule number 1? Rule number 1. One person, one vote. Rule number 1.
Yep.
Got it. Okay, rule number 2, no discrimination on the basis of race. You can discriminate any other way you want, but not on race. That is literally, in our law, the only thing that you can't discriminate on.
So they don't have to provide at the voting polls ramps for people in wheelchairs or any type of other?
Well, so there, I mean, there are all sorts of things that, you know, there are other laws that
Covers that.
ADA
Okay.
compliance, but in terms of the voting rights and specifically drawing maps, all other forms of discrimination. I mean, it would be hard to discriminate in some of those ways, but so The Voting Rights Act of 1965 has these two important sections. Section 2, you can't discriminate against racial or language minorities. And Section 5, which required that states and territories, districts that have a history of bad behavior have to get pre-approval of their maps. Section 5 existed for a long time, was in effect for a long time, but then Shelby County, Alabama filed a lawsuit, and the result of Shelby v. Holder was that the Supreme Court ruled that we needed to update the rules about which were the bad behaving states and local governments. How do we pick what a bad behaving state or local government is? And they said Congress should update that. It's been a few years. Congress should come up with a new rule. Well, Congress can't come up with squat right now. So Congress didn't come up with a new rule. And so since the Shelby v. Holder decision came down, no state or local government has had to get their map pre-approved. Had Alabama been forced to get their map pre-approved, it would not have been approved, and we would have had a different map back in 2022. Instead, they were able to get their map approved, and now we had to go through the whole lawsuit, and we won't get this new map until 2024. So what does it mean to discriminate against racial or language minorities? We'll talk a little bit more about that. Gingles is the lawsuit that provided clarity about how to define this, and we'll get into a little bit more details on that. All right, so rule number 1, you got one person, one vote. Rule number 2, no discrimination on the basis of race or language minorities, but and that's it. You know all the rules. Them's the rules. Literally no other rules. Kind of terrifying that there are no other rules. But at the national level, in terms of federal law, there are no other rules. States sometimes put in place other rules, other guidelines, other preferences, but those are the only 2 rules that actually truly have to be followed. There you have it. Okay, so Alabama came up with its own rules, its own guidelines, and they have been using these for at least 20 years. So minimizing population deviation is the same as rule number 1, one person, one vote. Compliance with the voting right, that's rule number 2, no discrimination. And then contiguous geography, which means that you can't have half of the district over here and the other half of the district over here, and say District 1 is made up of these 2 separate parts. They have to be connected in some way. Even if they're shaped in weird and funky ways, as long as it's a single polygon, you're okay. But it can't be 2 different polygons, 2 different shapes. It has to be reasonably compact, and there are fancy statistical ways for measuring compactness. So ideally, it does not look like an octopus. Ideally, it looks more like a rock or a square or a triangle. And then Alabama wants to avoid county splitting. It wants to avoid contests between incumbents. And at the very bottom of the list, they want to care about communities of interest. Communities of interest meaning people who think of themselves as being one community with shared interests and goals. So Alabama says these things are important to them. All right, so gerrymandering. Gerrymandering simply means that you're manipulating the boundaries of a district to favor one group of people over another. It's almost always happening, right? Gerrymandering does not mean that you make it look like an octopus. If you make it look like an octopus and it doesn't change anything, doesn't favor one group over another, that's not really gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is when it favors a particular group of people. And there are various types of gerrymandering. So partisan gerrymandering is when you gerrymander in a way to favor your political party. You want more Democratic seats or you want more Republican seats. That's partisan gerrymandering. Bipartisan gerrymandering is when, let's say I'm a Democrat here in my district and John is the Republican over in the next district. Sorry, John. And John and I agree that if we draw this map right, my district's going to be safely blue and his is going to be safely red. So that one neighborhood that he has that's really Democratic, how about we put that on my side of the district line? And that one Republican neighborhood that's so annoying to me, I'm going to put that over on John's side of the map. And then John and I both get safely elected next year. We both benefit, but it doesn't benefit the voters. It only benefits the incumbents. That's called a bipartisan gerrymander. Then we have racial gerrymandering. That's when it benefits a particular racial group. We have prison gerrymandering, where you use the prison population to inflate or deflate the population of a district. Campus gerrymandering, the same way. All sorts of gerrymandering things you could do, ways you could benefit one group of people over another. All right, so which of these are legal? What do you think? Is partisan gerrymandering legal? Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally legal. Yeah, you're allowed to do it. No problem. Is bipartisan gerrymandering legal? Yeah, help yourself. No problem. Nobody minds. No court will stop you from doing it. Is racial gerrymandering legal? No. No, it is not. And that is why we are here today, getting new maps. Prison gerrymandering, campus gerrymandering, all of those things are legal unless a state has rules against them. There are a couple states that do, but Alabama sure doesn't. We allow all types of gerrymandering, and we try to get away with racial gerrymandering here in Alabama too, but the courts caught us. By us, I don't mean me. Okay. All righty then. The most popular gerrymandering tactics are, and here I'm talking about, we're going to give examples focused on racial minority vote dilution. So let's imagine a community. It is 36 people who live in this state. And 16 of the 36 members are minorities. So that's 44% of the population that is minorities. In this first example, we did cracking. So we drew the lines such that in every single district, the minority remains the minority. And the majority wins their preferred candidate in every single district. It's always 5-4. Always. They always get what they want. That is called cracking, because absolutely 44% should be able to, a 44% minority should be able to elect at least one of their preferred candidates. But if you draw the map in this way, then the minority is not able to elect any. So that is called cracking. You split up the minority to make sure that they never get control or power. The other way of gerrymandering is packing. So you see in that second example on the right, they fit as many minorities into one district as they could. And that district gets to elect a minority representative, but none of the others do. So despite being 44%, the minority community only has influence in one of the 4 districts. They get total control of that one, but they don't even have a chance in any of the others. So that's considered packing. And this is happening in Alabama, in case you couldn't guess. This is absolutely what has happened in Alabama. Wrong button. Okay, So what was Allen and Milligan about? Allen v. Milligan is the Supreme Court case that was just decided in favor of Milligan. Again, Evan Milligan, he is a Montgomery resident and he lives in Terry Sewell's district, District 7. And he is the executive director of Alabama Forward. And he did this case along with a number of other Alabamians with the help of the NAACP, ACLU, Greater Birmingham Industries, etc. So what his lawyers argued is that the map violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act by diluting the votes of Black Alabamians by packing Black voters into District 7. So again, here in Alabama, we're 27, Black folks are 27% of the population. We have 7 congressional districts. So it makes sense that the Black community would have at least 2, maybe, representatives. And instead it has 1 and absolutely no impact in the other 6 districts. No ability to elect, and by impact we mean ability to elect the candidate of your choice. No one's saying guarantee, but like to have enough political power in a district that you have the possibility of electing your preferred candidate. So Terry Sewell's district is 65% Black. That's packing all the Black folks into one district. And none of the other districts get above 30% Black. So that's packing into District 7 and cracking, and particularly cracking across Districts 1, 2, and 3. So District 1 is the Mobile area, coastal area. And it goes, right now, it goes up into the Black Belt, the southwestern part of the Black Belt. District 2 is the Wiregrass, and it comes up through Montgomery. And District 3 includes some of the Black Belt, but also heads further north towards Lake Gadsden. So those 3 districts each have a significant Black population, which if put together could elect another Black congressional member, but instead they're cracked so that they don't have, so that the Black community isn't able to elect a preferred candidate in any of those 3 districts. So Alabama's lawyers argued that no. So Milligan, let me go back to Milligan and say, so Milligan's lawyers said, Section 2 says you can't discriminate and you're discriminating by packing and cracking. Alabama's lawyers said, no, we didn't discriminate. First of all, we don't like your alternative maps, which is a dumb place to, first of all, because like you're being accused of something that's such whataboutism to turn it on to somebody else's maps. But they said the maps that the plaintiffs brought didn't keep the Gulf Coast intact. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, we don't care about that because you're currently cracking the Black Belt across multiple districts. And that's just as much an important region that should be kept together as the coast. So no to that argument. Second argument is a big problem. Alabama's lawyers said that the plaintiff's map didn't retain the core of previous maps. So you might recall one of their preferences, one of Alabama's guiding principles, is that they want the map to not change a whole lot from year to year, from decade to decade. That's nice that they want to do that, is what the Supreme Court said. That's a nice thing you could want, but you're not guaranteed that. Nobody promised you that. And there are other things that are far more important than keeping districts the same. If you say that you're allowed to not make changes, you're allowed to discriminate against Black people because it's always been done that way, it's not a good argument. So no on the retaining the core of previous maps. Next, they said maps need to be drawn in a race neutral way. So their argument was, okay, race isn't bad, but we didn't use race, so we're not racists. We drew our maps using computers. So what they did was, yes, there are these, again, I think you can draw a map by hand. I'll show you. But they use these fancy computer systems, $10,000 to buy a license to get this computer program. And they used it, and you can, on the computer program, set the criteria that you want to use. And you can say, I want it to look at race, or I don't want it to look at race. I want it to look at economics. I don't want it to look at economics. There's all these things you can have it look at. And so they turned off the race. The system no longer knows what the race of the people in those districts are. And then they had the computer generate maps. And none of the maps that they came up with gave Black folks a second district. So therefore it's fine. They weren't being racist because they didn't even look at race. And the Supreme Court said, no, that is not what Section 2 says. So rewind all the way back to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. When that section was created, there was a lot of confusion about whether or not it was talking about intentional racial discrimination or unintentional. And so Congress stepped in and clarified, actually passed this section to say it is the effect. If the effect, whether intentional or not, is to discriminate against a racial or language minority, then it's a violation, regardless of what the intention was. So Alabama lawyers were trying to change that and say, no, it has to be intentional. And the Supreme Court rejected that argument. Finally, they argued that the plaintiffs should have to prove that the maps were drawn intentionally to discriminate. So C and D were both arguments about what does it mean to be racist and not racist. And the Supreme Court said, we're not talking about being racist. We're talking about, does the map have a negative impact on Black people or not? And it does. It has a negative impact on Black people that it's drawn the way that it is. So how do we decide though? So there's this complicated way that we decide. And that complicated way is called, if I can find my button, there we go. That is called Gingles. Gingles. Okay, so there was a Supreme Court case years ago, Thornburg v. Gingles. This was again about gerrymandering. And in this case, they drew out criteria. What are the conditions that you have to meet in order to prove that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act has been violated? So they laid out these 3 conditions. All 3 have to be met if you want the Supreme Court to intervene on your behalf. So number 1, a minority group has to be sufficiently large and geographically compact to constitute a majority in a reasonably configured district. So you have to be able to draw a map that has that additional minority district, whether you're going for your first minority district or your second or your third, however many you're trying to achieve, you have to be able to show that it's possible to create a map where that district will be 50% plus 1 minority. Population or voters? We're not totally sure what the answer is on population for voters, but seems like population is the answer. So you must show 50% that the population is at least 50% plus 1 minority. Number 2, the group has to be politically cohesive. So what do we mean by that? What we mean is that you have to run this fancy statistical analysis to demonstrate that in the case of Alabama, that Black folks tend to vote for the same candidates. And in Alabama, yes, overwhelming evidence, Black folks vote for Democrats 85% of the time. So yes, that group is politically cohesive. 3, you have to demonstrate that the other folks, that the white folks in the district or in the state are voting as a block in the opposite direction. And in Alabama, it's only about 20% of white folks who vote Democrat. So yes, we proved all three. So they did have to draw a map. The plaintiffs had to show that a map could be drawn in which all in which the district was 50% plus one Black, in order to say that the Black community had its votes diluted. So all three of these had to be met. The plaintiffs successfully met the Gingell's criteria after much debate and discussion. But those are met. Are there questions about this? I know this is kind of a complicated notion. Have I made it sound simple? That's my goal. All right, so far so good. We can come back to it if we need to. Okay, so let's look at Alabama specifically. Okay, so let's look at Congressional District 7 first. So here in Congressional District 7, you will see that the district is packed. It has, and my numbers here are my best estimates. I am not claiming to be a demographer or statistician, but I feel pretty good about them. They're close enough to be useful. So District 7 is like super blue. Black Democrats are a huge part of that, but also non-Black Democrats are a huge part of what makes this district so blue. Black Republicans still exist, but are a smaller chunk, and non-Black Republicans are a smaller chunk. But we call this packed because there are so many voters that agree that their votes are not as valuable. It's like living in a place that has more voters than you need. Your value as a voter is less, because even if you don't show up to vote, the same outcome is going to happen. Terry Sewell is going to win, even if 10,000 Black folks stay home. And that means that the value of a Black vote is being diluted. Okay, so now I want you to look at the other three. So if you look at, we're looking at District 1, 2, and 3 as a group. They look very similar to each other, right? The distribution of voters in those districts is almost identical. There is a, the Black community is 25 to 30% of the population, but never going to win anything. Those are safely red districts, despite the fact that across those three districts, there are so many Black voters. But they're cracked, they're separated into separate groups so that they cannot form a coalition together to elect their candidate of choice. All three of these districts just happen to look like this. So we call these cracked. A lot of Black voters here, but none of them are able to elect their preferred candidate. The value of their vote is different than the value of a white person is very likely to get their preferred candidate, and a Black voter is less likely to get their preferred candidate. We want to minimize that. Graphs take time to read. Do you need a minute? Does it make sense? Okay.
Black votes are being diluted because of blocking.
So it's just the fact that, so between these three districts, so each district has like 700,000 people in it. So a third of 700,000 is, what's a third of 700,000? I don't know. It's a good amount. That's 200,000. Yeah. So, but a third of 2.1 million, that's 700,000 people. So if it's a third of three different districts, it's a whole district worth of Black folk. if Black folks make up a third of 3 different districts, then if those districts were set up differently, Black folks would have a second district. But they were drawn like this on purpose.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Alabama's lawyers insist it was not drawn on purpose like this.
Yeah, they'll shoot you in the foot for that saying that.
But again, they may not have included race in their calculations, but they did make sure that it looked like the map from last year. And they did make sure that they're allowed to do that partisan gerrymandering to make sure that Republicans win in all 3 districts. So again, their intention may have just been to ensure a Republican victory, but the effect is to dilute the Black vote. And that's what the Supreme Court ruled. Okay, so questions that you don't generally ask in polite company, but I'm about to ask, how many Black people is enough Black people? How much is enough? What percentage of the population needs to be Black in order for Black voters to be able to elect their preferred candidate? This is a hot topic of debate, and it is what is going to be debated over the next few weeks. I am sure of it. So again, Congressional District 7, Terry Sewell's district, it doesn't need to be that Black. It doesn't need to be that Black. 56% of the population is Black. It doesn't need to be that Black. It is winning overwhelmingly. No one ever runs against Terry Sewell. There's no chance a Republican is going to win. That's too much. We're playing a little what do you call it? Little Goldilocks here. Congressional District 2, same as in 1 and 3, too little, not enough for the Black community to be able to elect their preferred candidate. So what would be enough? So this third example is a minority opportunity district, sometimes called minority opportunity district, sometimes called a crossover district. It's a district where the Black population is 44%. So it's not hitting 50%. And yet at 44% Black, this district is still absolutely a safely blue district. Black voters will be able to elect their preferred candidate by forming a coalition with white voters, with white Democrats or non-Black Democrats. Is that allowed? It's not a majority minority district. Is it allowed or isn't it allowed? So you'll hear a lot of talk about creating a second majority minority district. And majority minority typically means 50% plus 1 Black. But is that strictly required? Or what the law says is that it needs to be enough to allow the Black community to elect their preferred candidate. So lots of legal scholars are arguing about this question. Can this new district, does it need to be 50% plus 1 Black? Could it be less than 50% Black as long as the Black community's preferred candidate is elected via a coalition or crossover voters? Hot topic. I have opinions, but good to know that it is a hot topic. All right. So I want to talk for a minute about interracial coalitions. Interracial coalitions should be happening. Let's look first at this top graph. So in the top graph, you can see the Black population in Alabama counties. You can see that there are 25 counties, maybe it's 24, I don't know. There are a good number of counties that have between 0 and 15% Black population. That's that first column. The next column is there are about 15 counties where the population is between 15 and 30% Black. There are fewer counties, maybe 12 counties, where the population is between 30 and 45% Black. Down the road until you get to the last little nubby column, there are just 2 counties in Alabama where the county is between 75 and 90% Black. Okay, so we see this kind of standard stepping stone. It's not totally even, but it's pretty much what you would expect to see. It's a curved line. We see there are counties that are strongly Black, or counties that are mostly Black, and counties that are barely Black, and counties that are in between. I just want you to see the full diversity of it, right? This is how it goes. Now, compare that to the second graph. In the second graph, you'll see similar stair step, except there's a hole in the middle. That hole in the middle, it should exist. There should be something there. What's happening here is that there are a whole lot of districts. I'm looking here at state house districts just to show you quantities. So there are 105 state house districts in Alabama, and of the 105 districts in Alabama, 76 of those districts are wide enough to be safely Republican. They are the Black population is at most 31%. Black population cannot elect their candidate of choice safely Republican districts. There's also a group on the right of 28 districts in which the Black population is 46% or higher. And in those districts, they are safely Democrat. There are almost no districts that have between 31% and 46% Black population. Would we expect that simply because Black people don't live with white people in those numbers? No. We see in the other graph above it that that is how communities are set up. There are plenty of communities that are set up in that 30 to 45 range, right? Look at all those counties in that 30 to 45 range. We should not see this hole in the middle. This hole in the middle is created by politicians who do not want to see coalitions of white and Black voters coming together to elect their preferred candidate. So they pack, those are the ones on the left, or they crack, those are the ones on the right.
Understand it now, got it.
Not in that middle. That middle section would be fair. It would allow for interracial coalitions to elect candidates. And wouldn't our world be a better place if interracial coalitions were happening more often? But it is this kind of gerrymandering that I believe is contributing to the division, the racial division in our country, and particularly in Alabama. They cut out the ability for interracial coalitions to succeed. And I think they did it on purpose. I think it's intentional. But I don't want to go to court. All right. So there's this very important question. Are we required to have majority minority districts? Does it have to be 50% plus one or not? Or will we end up with a crossover district? So 2 important court cases to know that, again, I expect you'll hear in the news in the weeks to come. One is Bartlett versus Strickland. So in Bartlett v. Strickland, the court found that a majority minority district did not need to be created because there was no way to draw a map with a true majority minority district, 50% plus one. The plaintiffs were saying, yeah, but white people vote for Democrats. Some white people do. all we need is 40% Black. We can still, Black folks can get their preferred candidate with a coalition. And the Supreme Court said no. But they said no because it doesn't meet Gingell's Condition 1. Gingell's Condition 1 said you got to be able to draw it. Gingell's does not say that that's what you're going to end up with. Maybe that's what they meant. I don't know if that's what they meant. Nobody has yet tested the question. Now, there are some states where, so this is Cooper v. Harris. So in Cooper v. Harris, North Carolina had a district where that was a coalition district. It was a crossover district. It was like 40% Black, and there were enough non-Black voters forming a coalition that the Black community was electing their candidate of choice. And the Republican legislature said, 40%? Boy, that's not enough. We're going to pack some more Black folks into that district. So North Carolina packed that district even further with Black folks. And the plaintiffs in that case said, no, you're packing. We already had enough voters to elect the candidate of our choice. At this point, you're not assuring our ability to elect a candidate of our choice, you're packing and wasting our votes. And the Supreme Court agreed. So Bartlett v. Strickland makes it sound like you got to have 50% plus one. And maybe that's what he was saying. Cooper v. Harris makes it sound like, no, you don't. If the coalition works, a new district, the requirements, you do have to prove it's possible. But Cooper v. Harris says you don't have to make the district that packed, as long as a coalition, a crossover district, would elect the preferred candidate of the Black community. So I think this is going to be hotly debated, and we'll see where they come down on it. Make sense? This is a light speed training. I love it. Okay. Oh, I've got things in the chat. Oh, folks who had to leave. That's okay. All right. So let's talk about timeline. What's going to happen? So first, I just want to go back in time a little bit and say how weird this timeline has been. So typically, we would have new maps in May or June of the year following the census. So of the year that ends in 01, we would have a new map that year in May or June. But in 2020, the census was delayed because of the pandemic. So we didn't get the data that we needed to do redistricting until April, late April, which means that we weren't able to put together maps until November. So the legislature moved quicker than it usually moves and put together maps in November of 2021 or October of 2021. And then members of, it might have been November. I don't trust myself that it says October. And then the congressional elections were held in November of 2022. So folks had only a year of knowing what the map looked like before the election happened. Because of the Supreme Court ruling, these new maps will go into effect for the 2024 election. And that may seem like a long ways away, but it is right around the corner. So qualifying for those races, filling out all the paperwork you have to do to get on the ballot, the deadline to fill out that paperwork is November 10th. So we need this map to be drawn quickly, and then candidates have to decide if they want to run in these new districts. And they have to decide by November 10th of this year. So, so there's kind of that pressure. And I should say too, congressional seats are a little bit funny. You don't have to live in the district that you run in. Not true for state house and state senate. You got to live in the district that you run. But for Congress, you don't have to live in that district to run in that district. So we may see some strange things happening where people are running in districts they don't live in. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. But typically what you see is the new districts get announced and then people all of a sudden buy a new house in the district that they want to run in or rent an apartment. But it doesn't matter for congressional races. So there is no residency requirement. All right, immediate timelines. So we're going to have public hearings on this, on redistricting and what people want to see out of these maps. Those are going to happen on June 27th, that's Tuesday, and on July 13th, both in the middle of the workday. And you can only really participate if you're there in person. Yay, so convenient for people to participate. So that's unfortunate. You can watch remotely, but the hearing, in order to participate in one of these public hearings, you have to be in Montgomery on that day at 1:30. If you want to submit a proposal, you can submit a map for consideration. It has to be submitted by July 7th at 5 p.m. Then the legislature will go into special session on July 17th. And there is a redistricting committee. Any map that is submitted will have to go through a review process with state staff. And then it would go to the redistricting committee. And like any other bill, the redistricting committee has to come up with the bill. They put forward a bill, and then it has to work its way. It has to be approved by the committee, then approved by the House or Senate, then approved by the other body, then signed by the governor. So like any other bill, it has to go through all those processes. So if you want a map, if you want your map to be up for a vote, it's going to have to get into the hands of a committee member who then submits it as a bill. So good luck. If anyone's interested, we can talk more about that. But then they'll turn it in, the legislature will turn in their new map to the district court on July 21st. And the district court will review it and determine if it meets the criteria or if it violates Section 2 again. And there's already a district court hearing set up for August 14th in case there's a problem with the map submitted on July 21st. There you go. Woo! I got it done in darn close to an hour. Speedy Gonzalez over here. All right. What questions do you have? And if you want to look at maps, we can look at maps now. So that was my thought, was that I'd try and get through the presentation in an hour. And then I'm happy to look at maps with you and talk through some examples. But of course, you're not obligated to stay with me. Yeah. Bye, Kathy. Okay, so some of the maps. The plaintiffs in the Milligan lawsuit had an expert who drew maps, and he provided the court with 4 maps that he said would meet the criteria, and presented those to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court is it's not the Supreme Court who will decide which map, right? It's this Alabama state legislature. So if they fail to come up with a adequate map, then the courts would step in and pick a map. But the state legislature is not obligated to use one of the 4 maps that was presented at the Supreme Court. Those maps were presented as examples. Examples of what? Anybody remember? Any nerds out there? Gingles? Gingell's precondition 1 says that you have to be able to demonstrate that you can draw a map that has a second majority minority district. So that is why they presented these maps, was to demonstrate that, yes, in fact, you can have a second majority minority district. Now that they've proven it, that met Gingell's precondition 1. It's not clear that that means that that one of these maps will be used. But these maps are important for proving Gingell's precondition 1. So here's one map. If you're interested in checking these maps out, you can go to davesredistricting.org. Dave's Redistricting is this amazing free site. Again, the software that the state uses is 10 grand per license. The software that I like is free, called Dave's Redistricting. And I've drawn my own maps, as have others. And so you draw the map here, and then you can also click on statistics and see what your maps look like. So you'll see here, one person, one vote. These districts are all exactly 717,000 people, 717,754 or 55 people. Exactly. You could maybe get away with a slight more variation than that, but generally, this is standard practice, is no variation in the size of the districts. All the districts have to be contiguous. They can't be two separate sections. And you can see here what the partisan outcome would be. This creates two blue districts. This second district is less safely blue than 7th district. But both of them are over 50% Black. But you'll notice there are coalitions here. There are interracial coalitions happening. And when the Black percentage is over 50%, you're seeing a pretty safely Democratic seat. So that is one of the 4. Here's another one of the 4. Slightly different setup, but still the intention is to create a second majority minority district. And in all of his examples, it's District 2 that becomes the second majority minority district. Now, I say District 2, but it's a totally different district than has existed before, right? Right now, District 2 includes these counties down here in the Wiregrass. It includes Houston County, Geneva County, Henry County, and this map takes those out and puts them on a coastal, in a coastal district. And so then these other counties are added to District 2. So now all of a sudden we've got, Conecuh and Monroe. Well, Conecuh was previously in 2nd district, but Monroe was not before. And so now Mobile would be in the same district as Montgomery. And here's another option. So this map, similarly, Terry Sewell's district is from Birmingham and a good portion of the Black Belts. And then the 2nd congressional district includes Montgomery, Black Belt, and goes down to Mobile. Map A, similar. So all of the maps that they presented all take that same approach of Jefferson County with Black Belts, so Birmingham and Tuscaloosa together, and Mobile and Montgomery together. But this is not the only way to draw 2 majority minority districts in Alabama. So although these are what you're going to see in the newspaper over and over and over again, because they were presented in court, these are not the only possibilities. It could be drawn quite differently. So I have lots of options here. So here's another way you could go about it. So in this example, Birmingham becomes its own district. Mostly its own district, but a little bit of Birmingham and Mobile go together. Oh no, that's not the one that I meant to show you. No. So if you go to Dave's and want to play around with it, come here to Dave's Redistricting Home and you click on Alabama. And it will show you the current maps that are currently operational. And I think it's helpful to look at the current congressional map and see what we mean about the current, why there's a problem right now, why it violates Section 2. You can also look at notable maps and see people who see maps that are interesting. So here's the most proportional map anyone's ever drawn. Here's the most competitive map someone's drawn. So these are all just like regular people, not high-paid executives who are out here drawing maps. Cheese Boy drew a map and it won for most proportional. So you too can draw a map if you were interested in drawing one. You don't have to call yourself Cheese Boy. We have compactness. So these would be very compact districts. But is this fair? So this is a great example of a compactness question. Like, is this a fair map? Just because this is what I think a lot of people assume is the best kind of map. Shouldn't it just be drawn in big square chunks? But you end up with some strange decisions that are made. Least splitting, all sorts of options. So here's our current map. So you can see District 2 is drawn in a way that seems odd, but it's drawn to include Birmingham, the blackest parts of Birmingham. It includes the blackest parts of Montgomery, and it includes sections of the Black Belts. Now, if it didn't go so far into Montgomery, it wouldn't be packed the way that it is. If it didn't go so far into Birmingham, it wouldn't be packed. If it didn't have this extra little finger down here, it wouldn't be so packed. If District 2 had the west side of Montgomery, District 2 might be competitive. So they say this was not drawn with a racial lens, but it's hard to imagine what lens, I guess partisan, drawn with a very partisan lens to create this result. And poor District 4, if you run for office in District 4, you got to drive all the way across the state to make this work. So these are not perfect maps by any means. And the result then is that all of these seats are safely red and just one that is safely blue. And there's just 1,000 other ways to draw these maps. Robert asks, could this chance to redraw the map reduce the competitive nature of District 5 starting in 2028? Reduce its competitiveness? I would not say 5 is very competitive. So as it stands right now, District 5 is, I guess it's more competitive than some of the other districts. A lot of people have asked why there isn't a, there aren't a whole, you won't see people proposing maps that involve Huntsville, even though Huntsville seems like a place that's turning more progressive over time. But Huntsville just doesn't have the population for it. So it is difficult to draw a map that would include Huntsville in a majority-minority district or a crossover district. Robert, do you want to chime in?
Sure. I'm not saying it is competitive now. I was saying that if you've seen going back to 2000 all the way up to 2022, races going from 70% Republican all the way down to, I think the last race was 59% Republican. I'm not saying it's going to be competitive anytime. Like I said, probably wouldn't start being competitive until 2028, 2030, when it's the last one before they have to recycle. But I was wondering if you or anyone thought that maybe they could try to curb that in some way in this set before we get to the next one.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good example here of a highly competitive map. So this map shows 3 safely red seats and 4 competitive districts. We could have a map where there were 4 competitive districts. Wouldn't that be amazing?
I would say that would be good, but then it turns into a party versus party, and we don't have the firepower at the moment for that. It would still be sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the thing. These are the debates that I think are exactly what we need to be happening. You know, like some people would prefer more competitive districts. Some people would not. You know, I think it's a reasonable thing to disagree about. I didn't mean to poo-poo it at all. I hear what you're saying. And that's one where, yeah, Huntsville does become part of a competitive district. Kathy asks, with the new maps on District 5 with DeKalb and Marshall. So. So the trouble with making, if you want Huntsville to be part of a competitive seat, you're gonna have to tie it to other places where there are significant Black populations. And we'll do this. Let's look at minority demographics instead. No, it's not doing it yet. Hold on. Let me go to this one. Why is it not doing that? Oh, demographics. There we go. No, there's a way that I can do this. Why am I forgetting how? I want it by county. Shoot, I'm forgetting how to do it. I don't want it by district. I want it by county only. Why can't I remember how to do that? All right, there you can see the racial breakdown of the state. So the dark areas are where minorities live. And you'll see that the northern part of the state is just going to have a rough time assembling a minority majority district. So it almost certainly is going to involve the Black Belt and Birmingham and Mobile. Maybe Huntsville eventually will become a grouping, but this is really where we think it's most likely that the two majority minority districts or crossover districts will happen. Tammy, I see you've got your hand raised.
I do. I want to interpret what I think Robert was asking.
Please.
I could be wrong, Robert. So tell me if I think what he was asking is Huntsville is slowly moving more blue. Is there a way that the redistricting process this time, by making this second competitive district, they could shore up the redness of Huntsville by adding in other counties so that they are staving off a blue push later on? That's what I think Robert was saying. Can they make it less competitive in the Huntsville area during this process by making the second competitive district?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, that's essentially what I was saying. And I was meaning that this isn't really a topic that would come up until 2028. That's around the time that it's going to start getting more competitive.
Right. So by doing it now, could they stave it off? That's what okay, I'm done. Thanks.
Yep. I hear you. Thank you, Tammy. Tammy the interpreter. So yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of ways that the map could be drawn. This is one example. When I was first drawing maps, I was assuming the legislature was not gonna, I had a crazy feeling the legislature was not going to create a second majority minority district. So I was trying to figure out, would the legislature maybe create a minority opportunity district in hopes of avoiding a trip to the Supreme Court? That's what I thought they might do, is do something that was just barely good enough in hopes of not getting sued and going to the Supreme Court. So I was looking at options like this, where there's still one safe district, but maybe two that are more competitive. And, that's certainly possible. But I think that because of the trip to the Supreme Court, we're more likely to get two that are safe or closer to safe. And rather than getting, one that's safe and two that are competitive. All right, y'all. Key things that I want you to remember are just that interracial coalitions could change the face of Alabama, but people are intentionally trying to avoid those. And
Elementary question,
yeah,
and it goes back to the first rule, one person, one vote. Is everyone who votes counted as one person now?
yes,
Just wanted to
double check. Yes, yes,
check.
yes. But again, how many people are voting in your district? There are districts in Alabama where the turnout rate is much higher and districts where it's much lower. And in districts where turnout is much lower, the people who do vote have more power. So when someone is suppressing the vote, sometimes that is because if fewer people vote, the people who do get more power. Yes, great question. Emily asks, are there people we should be calling to make to advocate for a certain map? Yes, there is the committee members. So I will just say there's lots of places you can go, but here's what I recommend. If you're on Twitter, I recommend Chris England. He is on the redistricting committee and he tends to post all the helpful information. He's one of the House chairs, I believe. So he has posted when these are happening, and he has posted a list of the committee members, and you can call those people. The only way, so to challenge at this point, to challenge a state house or Senate map or any map, you'd have to go to court. These two hearings, the June 27th and July 13th, are your best opportunities to chime in. And I think one of the important things to weigh in on is, do you think the district should be majority minority, true majority minority, where it's 50% plus one Black? Or do you think that a coalition district is more appropriate? I think that's a reasonable thing for people to argue about, and I hope that they hear an earful about it at these public hearings. I also think questions about, like, does it make more sense to group Montgomery and Mobile, or Montgomery and Birmingham, or Birmingham and Huntsville? Like, what's the grouping that makes the most sense for creating these majority minority districts? If you have strong feelings about that, I think that's a great thing to provide public comment about. But again, my assumption is it's the extremely Republican legislature that's going to draw these maps. And the way they draw the map means that one of the current Republican congressmen is going to lose his seat. So a bunch of Republicans have to decide which Republican congressman is going to lose his seat. And that is an uncomfortable position for them to be. Or they could end up putting two of them, yes, who will be voted off the island. Exactly right. Probably what they'll do is put two of the congressmen in the same district, and they'll have to compete in a primary, so that they're not picking a loser. They're sending them to, what do you call it when you send people to council to decide who's going to get voted off the island? So they'll go to a primary to determine who gets voted off the island. So we'll see what happens. But again, I think there's reason to think that Barrymore is going to get voted off the island. It's the easiest map to draw. They know those maps would be accepted by the courts. So there's some reason to think that it'll be Barrymore's district. That will turn into a minority majority or a crossover district. I know, Michelle, you want to get rid of Mike Rogers. Everybody has their person. We'll see how it goes. All right, thank you all so much for your time and for your interest in this matter. And keep in mind, your local city council or county commission may not have drawn their maps yet. So I encourage you to go Google right now and find out when your city council and county commission last updated their maps. And if they're doing it soon, get involved, because you can have a lot more of an impact on that local level redistricting decision than on these statewide decisions. So holler at me if you want help doing that. Thank you all so much. Have a great night.
Thank you.